It's the Hall Institute of Public Policy Forum. My name is Mike Riccards. Our guest today is Robert P. Haney Jr., who's a member also of a major body that has so much to say about our educational process and about the standards that we are involved with. And how do we move from where we are in New Jersey to really these higher standards without committing additional monies?
Well, that, of course, is an issue because obviously education, like every part of local and state government, is under enormous financial pressure. The governor has imposed cuts on the State Department of Education. There's the potential for cuts in aid to the localities, and this is something that obviously has to be thought about. By the same token, we have to do our job always in pushing higher achievement and higher standards for our kids and making sure we're doing the best for the kids. So part of the issue is going to be the reallocation of resources and making sure that we're doing everything we can to prepare teachers to teach in the areas, the curriculum areas that are important for the future, and make sure that we're clear about what we think is important. You know, Mike, there's a lot of controversy over whether standards for high school graduation should increase, and if so, what those standards should be.
What would be the, suppose I were coming to the state board and I was opposing increase in these standards. What would be the arguments that I would be using to board members?
Well, we've heard different arguments, and there have been many citizens who have come in to both to support and to question or oppose the standards, both in general and sometimes in very specific ways. There are some members of the business community in particular that think even the new standards that are being put into effect aren't high enough and are not going to be pushing our kids to the level that's necessary. One of the communities that's been involved has been the higher education community in New Jersey, because there's been a problem, which is that kids, not all kids, but some kids coming out of New Jersey high schools and entering into 4-year or sometimes 2-year colleges can't do the basic math that's required for college-level work, and so they wind up spending a year or two trying to get to the level that a high school graduate ought to get to. And in principle, you would think that if somebody graduates from high school and is otherwise qualified for college, they ought to have the curriculum that would allow them to start in college without doing remedial work. And so we are hearing from those people. We're hearing from people in the business community that frequently the kids that graduate from high school in New Jersey can't do some of the math that they need for some basic jobs. So that's one set of opinions, and there are people that are saying that we're not pushing the standards high enough. There are others who disagree and say that Algebra 2, for example, is just not necessary for most kids, particularly kids that aren't going on to college or might be going into certain types of technical careers. And there's a whole debate over whether, even if you're not going to use Algebra 2 specifically, does the intellectual process of going through the training of Algebra 2 sufficiently benefit the student to justify the extra cost and the extra effort of teaching it.
But if you mandated Algebra 2 in a constituency really that'll never use Algebra 2, I don't think I've ever used Algebra 2 even in graduate school, doesn't that mean that you're doing nothing but increasing the dropout problem?
No. Not necessarily. There is a school of thought out there, some people who know a lot about math and learning, that says that going through the process of learning Algebra 2 strengthens your thinking and your analytical abilities in ways that go well beyond just the mastery of Algebra 2. And it helps solidify, for example, more of the basic math skills. In other words, if you can do E, F, and G, you're more likely to be founded and be able to do A, B, C, and D. and that it helps in general in your sophistication in life and the sophistication of your thinking. On the other hand, there are those that make exactly the point that you just alluded to, that very few people use sophisticated algebraic equations. But then the return point on that is you don't know what you're going to be doing and what our children are going to be doing in the future, because the world is becoming more sophisticated and competitive. So there's a very strong debate going on out there.
How does the State Board deal with the question of teacher certification, recertification, alternative certification? Those have been bandied around for years. Are those issues coming up again now before you?
Not at this point. I mean, there are obviously always teacher certification processes. One of the issues that comes up in connection with the increased high school graduation requirements is the mechanisms and the methods to make sure that each district has a sufficient number of teachers who have the foundation in these subjects to teach them. Obviously, if you're going to require kids to learn things, there have to be teachers that are qualified to teach. And there are mechanisms both at the state level and in each local district to encourage teachers and to cooperate in continued professional learning. There is a 100-hour requirement for professional education. And there are, for example, also alternative methods of teaching math. There are some kids that can't get a regular Algebra 2 course, but there are alternative ways of teaching the math that can help them to get it. And one of the things that we're going to have to do is encourage, if we adopt these requirements, is find ways for teachers to learn these alternative methods so that they are able to teach kids that might have difficulty learning in a traditional course.
Good. We'll come back, and I'm going to ask Bob about a topic that is close to his heart for a long time, the question of tuition costs and the need for scholarships.